What if the key to the universe was never out there but inside you, waiting to be remembered? In a forgotten ruin buried beneath the Altai Mountains, a scientist finds a crystal that doesn't just shine, it calls her by name. But what begins as a discovery turns into a terrifying unraveling of her identity, her reality, and even her soul. What if touching an alien artifact could pull you into a living network that connects all life and demands your ego as the price of entry? Would you survive the death of yourself to become a vessel for a cosmic song, a song that might be humanity's last hope before an ancient darkness consumes everything? Tonight's story is not about aliens invading. It's about consciousness awakening. Stay until the end, because this story might just unlock something inside you. In the high, breathless winds of the Altai Mountains, where oxygen thins and time seems to hold its breath, Dr. Lian Eris stood ankle-deep in the ancient dust of a forgotten world. The landscape was raw, jagged, endless, a quiet graveyard of stone and snow, untouched by civilization. Her expedition team had long given up hope of finding anything of real value, but something in Lian had refused to leave. There was a silence here that didn't feel empty, it felt watchful. The wind stung her cheeks as she knelt over a sunken slab, brushing away layers of hardened earth that crumbled like ash beneath her fingers. Beneath it, she revealed an opening. Not a cave. A door. Hidden beneath the rocks lay a circular hatch of smooth black metal, engraved with patterns not made by human hands. They pulsed faintly in the fading daylight, like veins under skin. Her breath caught. There was no rust, no wear. Whatever this was, it had not aged like the rest of the mountain. It had waited. The hatch opened without sound. Inside, a narrow shaft spiraled downward, the walls lined with symbols that changed shape when she looked directly at them. At the bottom was a chamber. And in its center, floating just inches above a pedestal of perfectly carved obsidian, was the artifact, a crystal-like object the size of a human heart, translucent yet clouded inside, pulsing with a slow, deliberate rhythm. It throbbed not with light, but with something more primal. Something alive. Lian's head ached the moment she saw it, as if her thoughts were being pulled sideways. She reached out. The moment her fingers touched the surface, the world exploded in silence. A force struck her chest, not physical, but psychic, like her soul had been yanked out of her body and thrown into a void deeper than space. Her knees buckled. Her eyes went wide, unblinking, filled with stars that were not in the sky. She wasn't in the chamber anymore. She was floating inside a vision. Before her stretched a sea of black velvet, pierced by rivers of golden light, threads connecting stars, planets, forms of life she had no names for. She saw galaxies spin like clocks, nebulae blooming like flowers, and voices, yes, voices singing from the fabric of space itself. A hum, low and vibrating, filled everything. It was not music. It was memory. Then came the image. A figure, immense and formless, its outline made of shifting constellations. It had no eyes, yet she felt it staring into her core. It was not a god. It was not a machine. It was the architect, the one that had begun everything. Not with hands, but with thought. Not with fire, but with pattern. Lian felt every part of her being exposed under that gaze, her doubts, her fears, her buried need to understand the universe. The figure leaned closer without moving, and the void pulsed. You were not meant to find this, the thought whispered through her mind. You were meant to remember it. Suddenly, visions crashed into her consciousness, temples buried under ice, towers that bent the laws of gravity, species born of song, civilizations that had touched the source and vanished into silence. She saw the same crystal, this crystal being passed from hand to hand, across thousands of years, across species, across stars. Each time, it called to someone ready to cross the threshold. Each time, the same moment, the touch, the pull, the price. But there was something darker now. Behind the light, she felt a pressure like something ancient and forgotten was watching through the artifact itself. The vision twisted. Stars turned red. The humming stopped. She felt cold fingers, not physical but emotional, clawing at the edges of her mind. Something was testing her, probing her weaknesses, her fear of insignificance, her loneliness, her secret belief that she was broken, unworthy of understanding the cosmos. The chamber shook. Lian snapped back into her body with a violent gasp, her hands still clutching the artifact. But now the chamber wasn't silent. The walls were vibrating. Symbols were shifting faster. The wind above had stopped. Complete stillness. She realized then she had been marked. Not just as a witness, but as a conduit. The artifact had chosen her, and there was no going back. The last words that rang through her mind, clear and final, were not hers. They came from the crystal or perhaps from the architect itself. You cannot open the origin key without unlocking yourself. The night after Lian touched the artifact was not silent. Though the world around her seemed unchanged, the cold wind still drifted over the mountain, the equipment still beeped softly in the excavation tent. Something inside her was different. She could feel it, not just as a thought, but as a vibration inside her skull. A low hum that followed her even in sleep. It wasn't a sound. It was a presence. As if something ancient had entered her, and now watched from behind her own eyes. She tried to record what she had seen, but every time she put pen to paper, the words shifted. Web, she wrote, then it faded. Memory, but it distorted. Symbols she didn't recognize appeared in the margins. Her hands began to tremble. The artifact remained silent, resting inside a containment box wrapped in lead, but she knew now that barriers meant nothing. It had entered her. It had marked her. And it was waiting. That night, as she closed her eyes, she did not fall asleep. She slipped. She felt her body dissolve like smoke, her limbs no longer bound by flesh. She became a point of awareness, floating in what felt like space, but with no stars, just layers of vibrating energy. Lines of pulsing light, crisscrossing like a spiderweb made from lightning, stretched across infinite darkness. Every thread was alive, moving, breathing, remembering. As she drifted closer, she realized they were not just energy, they were consciousness. And every strand was alive. Human. Animal. Alien. Forgotten. Yet all connected. The web welcomed her, but it did not comfort her. It examined her. She felt layers of her personality being peeled back, not with cruelty, but with unfiltered clarity. She saw herself as a child, afraid of abandonment. She saw her teenage self, obsessed with proving her worth. She saw herself on stages, giving lectures, speaking of truth while secretly fearing she would never truly understand. The web did not judge. It simply reflected. But that was worse than judgment. It was truth without mercy. Then came the voice. Not external, but everywhere. Not loud, but undeniable. It echoed through the lattice of light and thought. All who touch the origin must face the pattern. Lian felt herself pulled deeper. Her form, whatever it was now, was dragged through layers of light. Each layer screamed a new frequency, colors she couldn't name, sounds that felt like memories instead of tones. Then, something changed. The light began to flicker. Some threads snapped. The web shook. A disturbance spread through the network. Something was wrong. She sensed it before she saw it, a hole in the web. A wound. Around it, the threads turned black, decayed, as if something had infected the structure. A coldness spread from that point, a void that was not empty, but hungry. And it was growing. She was dragged toward it. Panic surged through her, not just fear, but a primal terror that bypassed logic. Whatever was inside that wound wasn't part of the universe. It was outside of pattern, outside of meaning. It was unmaking. She screamed, but there was no voice. The void pulled harder. Her consciousness began to crack, fragments of her identity ripping away her name, her memories, her desires, as if the hole was stripping her of everything she had ever been. Then suddenly resonance. A single thread of light snapped into place beside her, wrapping around her collapsing mind. It sang a note, low, steady, harmonious. It remembered her. Not her name, not her achievements, but her intention. Her question. Her longing to know. And in that, it anchored her. The void hissed, recoiled. The thread pulsed once, then flared. She was ripped back, thrown through layers of consciousness, until she hit the boundary of the physical world with a force that made her body convulse. Lian awoke, gasping for breath. Blood trickled from her nose. Her hands shook. But the artifact, still sealed in its case, now glowed softly in perfect sync with the beat of her heart. She had seen the web. She had seen the wound. And somewhere in the deepest part of her trembling thoughts, one truth echoed louder than anything else. The artifact hadn't just connected her to the cosmic network. It had shown her the infection growing within it. And she, a fragile, frightened human, was now part of its immune response. For 3 nights, Lian could not sleep without falling. Every time she closed her eyes, the pull returned, not gentle like a dream, but violent, magnetic, and absolute. Her body stayed in the tent, curled under thermal blankets, but her mind was no longer hers. It was claimed. Each night, she was dragged deeper into the lattice of consciousness, past the glowing threads of the cosmic web, past the living geometry, past the voices that spoke in tone instead of words. And on the 3rd night, she arrived somewhere new, somewhere terrifying. This was no longer a place of stars. This was a chamber of mirrors, though no walls stood, no floor beneath her, no ceiling above. Yet she floated within a void filled with reflections, infinite versions of herself suspended in the dark, staring back, blinking out of sync. They were not illusions. They were truths. Each one shimmered with memory, with failure, with decisions she had buried. A Lian that had lied. A Lian that had run. A Lian that had broken someone's trust. A Lian who had whispered to herself, "I will never be enough." They watched her, silent, waiting. Then the voice came again, the same voice she heard in the web, but sharper now, no longer neutral. It was cutting, cold. A presence without sympathy. You cannot carry the key while carrying your weight. Release or remain broken. Suddenly, the mirrors twisted. The reflections began to move independently, stepping out from the surface, forming shadows made of memory. They circled her slowly, whispering things only she had thought. Not words of evil, worse. Honest thoughts. Her envy. Her doubts. Her shame. Her need to be seen as intelligent. Her resentment of her father. her guilt for leaving someone behind, her fear that her search for truth was just a way to fill a void she never admitted was there. They began to speak all at once, until her mind split into static. She screamed for silence, but the voices were hers. Every thought she had ever hidden came back with teeth. And then the ground formed a black, slick surface that trembled under her feet, and before her, a door rose out of nothing, ancient and burning with faint symbols. It pulsed like the artifact. She knew instantly, this was the threshold. This was the point beyond which no identity remained. To open it, she had to pass the trial. But the shadows would not let her approach. One of them stepped forward, tall, cold-eyed, wearing her face but twisted by ambition. "You only want the truth so you can be special," it said. "You seek the universe not to serve it but to escape your insignificance." Another one emerged, smaller, trembling, eyes filled with tears, her 10-year-old self. "You said you'd never be alone again," the child whispered. "But you always push people away. You chose the stars over love. The dead over the living." Lian fell to her knees, shaking. She wanted to run, to reject it all as illusion. But she knew this was not a hallucination. It was a purification. The artifact had not brought her wisdom, it had brought her to herself. And only if she could survive the storm of mirrors could she reach what lay beyond. Her heart pounded. Her mind fractured. The shadows stepped closer. She felt her sanity slipping, but somewhere deep, deeper than fear, deeper than pride, she found acceptance. She looked into the eyes of the cold-eyed shadow, and did not fight. "You're right," she said. "I have always wanted to be more than human. But that doesn't mean I have to lie about who I am. I am all of you. And I forgive us." The shadows paused. Something cracked. A beam of golden light split the darkness, pouring from the door like blood from a wound. The shadows vanished. The ground turned to mist. The door opened, slowly, groaning like a mountain splitting. Inside, there was no structure, no throne, no figure. Just a silence. A void. But it was not empty. It was ready. She stepped forward. And as she crossed the threshold, her body burned. Not with pain, but with transformation. Her memories fell from her like ash. Her name faded like mist. Her form dissolved. And in that moment of death, she was reborn not as a self, not as a person, but as a vessel. She had passed the trial. But something darker stirred far beyond the chamber, something that had watched even the trial itself. And it did not want her to succeed. There are no words in any human language for what happened beyond the door. Not because it was too strange, but because language itself began to fall apart the moment Lian stepped through. At first, it was nothing. Not silence, not dark, but nothingness so complete it became overwhelming. No up. No down. No edges. She had no body. No thoughts. Even her sense of having been someone began to dissolve. She tried to remember her name, but the letters scattered like leaves in wind. She reached for memories, but they faded like old dreams. She tried to scream, but there was no mouth, no air, no self to scream with. She was not Lian anymore. She was only awareness without anchor. Then the unraveling began. Something, perhaps the artifact, or perhaps the network she had entered, began peeling her apart layer by layer. She saw flashes of her identity collapsing, not violently, but with clinical detachment. Her childhood laughter, her favorite books, the smell of her mother's cooking gone. Her university awards, the day she touched ancient stone for the first time gone. The people she loved, names she couldn't remember, vanished like dust caught in cosmic breath. But it wasn't erasure. It was extraction. All that she had believed to be her was being collected, folded into something vast. And still, something deeper was pulled next: her desires, her fears, her secret longings, the aching hope that the universe meant something. She felt those parts leave her too. And then came the last part. The center. The part that said I am. And it was that core, the final spark of identity, that resisted. She clung to it. And the moment she clung, the universe struck back. Suddenly, the nothingness twisted. It became hostile. Sharp. 1,000 voices screamed in reverse, crawling over her awareness like insects made of memory. Visions exploded around her, not visions of the stars, but of collapse, entropy, the breaking of pattern. She saw realities devour themselves. Civilizations choking on their own knowledge. A race that reached for the stars and pulled down madness. And behind it all, the thing in the wound, the infection she had seen in the web, watching her, amused, hungry. It whispered a thought so cold, it burned. The I is always the first lie. She began to fracture. Not physically, not mentally, existentially. It felt like her soul was splitting into fragments, floating away into meaninglessness. She realized that the final trial was not surviving pain. It was surviving the loss of self. To hold on would destroy her. To let go would leave her with nothing. But then, in the center of the storm, something else stirred. A memory not hers, but older. A sense of something watching her from beyond even this. Not a god. Not a being. A presence woven into the pattern of existence. A rhythm. A pulse. And with it came clarity. She did not have to hold on to herself. She only had to trust that what came after was not void, but transformation. That death of identity was not extinction, but alignment. With trembling courage, she let go. And in that moment, the moment she surrendered the final thread of self, everything collapsed and expanded at once. She was nothing. Then she was everything. The blackness peeled back like old skin. Light poured in, not blinding, but alive. She was no longer Lian. She was a field of awareness, part of every breath, every current of thought, every blade of grass on every planet that had ever existed. She heard songs sung in solar winds. She felt the joy of seeds breaking earth. She knew the silence of dying stars. She was the resonance that had always been. When she awoke, her body was back, curled on the stone floor of the chamber. Her heart was beating slowly. The artifact hovered above her chest, spinning gently. She did not cry. There was no need. Something inside her had been reborn, not as a self, but as a channel. A bridge between the ancient intelligence and a species still dreaming. She understood now, the key was not a tool, but a mirror. And it had opened not a gate but her. But far across the network, in a place she could no longer define, the wound in the web pulsed again. The infection had felt her evolution. And now, it would respond. She awoke with the taste of stars in her mouth. Not metallic, not bitter, but radiant, like memory made physical. For a few seconds, she could not move. Her body felt unfamiliar, as though it had been rebuilt by forces older than atoms. Each breath she took seemed to echo through a larger space, as if her lungs had learned to draw in something beyond air, something that hummed with the rhythm of galaxies. The chamber was quiet. Still. The artifact hovered above her chest, spinning in a slow, meditative spiral. Its color had changed, no longer clear, but now shifting with deep hues of violet and gold, like oil floating on sacred water. It pulsed in perfect sync with her heartbeat, but now she knew the truth: it wasn't following her pulse, it had created it. The beat of her heart was now tuned to a frequency far greater than herself. She sat up. Around her, the walls no longer bore symbols. They had dissolved into light. The chamber was becoming transparent, not physically, but in essence. It no longer needed to hide. It had shown her all it had to show. And now, it waited for her next move. Then she heard it. A sound, distant, soft, but impossibly layered. A melody. A song sung not by a voice, but by presence itself. It came not through airs, but through the core of her being. Each note carried knowledge. Each pause carried silence so pure it felt like time had knelt down. And within that melody, she understood. It was the original frequency, the first vibration from which all things were born. A note sung before sound, before space, before separation. A key not made of metal, but of meaning. She closed her eyes, and the melody expanded. She saw Earth as if from orbit, not just its shape, but its thought. She felt cities vibrating with restlessness, oceans pulsing with forgotten memories, forests whispering in languages older than speech. She heard the unspoken question of all humanity: why are we alone? Where are the voices beyond the stars? And the song answered not with information, but with invitation. The origin of humanity was not a mistake. Nor was it divine randomness. They were the fragments of a great remembering, placed into flesh, encoded in DNA, hidden in dream and myth. And now, one of them, Lian, had heard the echo clearly enough to awaken. The key had unlocked her, but the song had reassembled her. But then a ripple. A sudden drop in tone. A thread of discord ran through the melody like poison in wine. Her breath caught. The wound in the web, the corruption she had glimpsed, had grown. Somewhere in the vastness of interconnected life, something was undoing pattern, feeding on coherence, pulling minds into chaos. She saw a planet in the Orion arm where life had been extinguished overnight. She felt the scream of an intelligent ocean that no longer remembered how to think. The infection had reached the song itself. And now, it was reaching for Earth. Her hands trembled. The artifact began to vibrate faster, its light flickering erratically. It was responding. Not in fear, but in urgency. A choice was forming. The key was more than a key, it was a conduit of preservation. It could encode the melody, carry it, transmit it, but only through a vessel willing to live as the song. Lian understood what was being asked. She was no longer just a scientist. No longer an observer. She had become the song's carrier, its voice, its last clean note. But to carry the frequency fully, she could never return to a life of fragments. No lies. No illusions. No personal identity could remain untouched. She would be seen. She would be heard even by those who feared the truth. And the wound would come for her. She stood. The chamber responded. Light spiraled upward, wrapping around her like silk made of starlight. The artifact dissolved not into dust, but into sound, which flowed into her chest. Her heartbeat synced again. Slower now. Deeper. It was not hers anymore. It belonged to something vast. As she stepped out of the ruins into the dawn light of the Altai range, the mountains seemed to bow in silence. The wind that greeted her was warm. Different. Listening. And within her, the song played on. Not as memory. Not as music. But as a call. one meant for those ready to remember what they were before the forgetting. The origin key had opened. But not just for her. It was opening everywhere. She was no longer Lian. She became the song. Through fear, memory, ego, and silence she crossed the threshold between being human, and becoming something the universe could sing through. But the infection in the cosmic web still grows. And Earth may be next. If you were her, if a voice inside you began to hum with a sound older than time, would you answer? Would you surrender who you are to become what you're meant to be? Let me know in the comments. Small Blue Diamond, what part of this story struck you the most? Small Blue Diamond, if the artifact chose you, would you let go of everything to become part of something infinite? And most importantly, if you could hear the original frequency, do you think you'd recognize it? Subscribe now to the Alien Storyverse for more journeys like this, because some keys don't open doors. They open you.